Welcome to Resonance Podcast. In this episode, The Architect of Harmony, decoding the divine music of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Johann Sebastian Bach. Even the name itself, I mean, it just brings up a whole universe of sound. This guy is like a giant, not just in the Baroque era, but in all of Western music, I'd say.
I completely agree.
I mean, just think about it. His innovations, his pure mastery, it's like he laid the groundwork for giants like Mozart and Beethoven. They wouldn't be the same without him.
That's so true. Today we're going deep, really deep into Bach's world. We want to get to know the man, the man behind all this amazing music, his life, how his creative journey unfolded, his almost unreal command of musical forms, and just what is it, that makes his music so instantly recognizable.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget the big picture, the historical and cultural scene of the Baroque era.
Right. A period that you could argue ended with Bach's death in 1750.
Yeah, many would agree.
It's a story filled with history and artistry, and there's no doubt that Bach is one of its most important threads.
All right, let's start at the beginning with his roots. What's really interesting is that music for Bach wasn't just like a job. It was in his blood, like a family tradition going back generations.
Exactly. For generations, the Bach family in northern Germany, they were musicians. It wasn't just a way to make money. It was like their identity, a source of real family pride.
And he even took the time to write it all down, right? I mean, around 1735, he put together this genealogy, Ursprung der musikalisch-Bachischen Family, tracing it all the way back to his great-great-grandfather, Veit Bach.
Yep, that's right. Veit Bach was living in the late 16th century. He was a baker and miller, a Lutheran. When he had to find refuge in Weimar in Thuringia, playing the cittern, this like simple string instrument, it brought him peace and joy. And Johann Sebastian actually saw that, this simple act of music making, as like the starting point, the source of his family's incredible musical journey.
I love that image. And even though his immediate ancestors weren't mainly composers, it's amazing to think that several of his sons, guys like Wilhelm Friedman, Carl Philipp Emanuel, and even Johann Christian, the one we call the English Bach, they all became, big deal musicians themselves. It shows you just how strong that musical heritage was.
It really does. It tells you everything about the world he grew up in. Surrounded by music, literally from day one. I mean, that constant exposure, it had to be incredibly influential.
So let's talk about his early years. He was born in Eisenach, Thuringia in 1685. By our calendar, that's March 31st. Early on, he got a very traditional education, rooted in the Lutheran faith, learned Latin, the whole deal. But sadly, his childhood was also marked by loss very early on.
Absolutely. Both his parents died before he turned 10. So he went to live with his oldest brother, Johann Christoph, who was a church organist in Ohrdruf.
And that's where his real structured musical training began, under Johann Christoph's wing, right? First keyboard lessons, exposure to all the big composers of the time, the whole thing.
Exactly. And then this awesome opportunity comes up. It was his voice, his amazing soprano singing voice. It landed him a spot at a school in Lüneburg. This period was crucial, man. It opened up his musical world, exposed him to European musical traditions way beyond what he knew from his family and region.
Lüneburg sounds like a real turning point for him. He was singing in the choir, playing the organ, the harpsichord, and on top of all that, he had this tutor, Georg Bohm, the local organist.
Right, Bohm was a huge influence. He connected Bach to the North German organ tradition, which is so rich, and likely introduced him to French organ music, too. This exposure to so many different styles, that's what really shaped his own unique musical voice.
All right, let's move into his early career. We start with him going back to Weimar in 1708.
Yeah, he returns to Weimar and becomes the court organist and a member of the orchestra under Duke Wilhelm Ernst. And here's something really interesting. During these early years in Weimar, the Duke, he actually pushes Bach to focus on composing for the organ. He saw the talent, he recognized Bach's amazing skills.
Which makes sense, right? Man, he was already a keyboard wizard. But then in 1714, he gets promoted to concertmeister. What exactly was that role? Like, what did he do?
Concertmeister, you could say it's like a concertmaster or even leader of the music. In this position, Bach had this big responsibility, composing a brand new church cantata every single month for the Duke's chapel.
Wow.
Imagine that pressure. New sacred music every month. It really pushed his creative boundaries, especially when it came to cantatas.
So it wasn't just about playing the music. It was about constantly creating new music.
Yeah.
And during this time in Weimar, his style, the way he composed, it really started to change, right?
Oh, totally. This is where we see a real shift, a major transformation in his style. It was influenced a lot by what was happening in Italian opera at the time and the concertos of composers like Vivaldi.
Ah, Vivaldi.
The Italian style, with its clear melodies, rhythmic drive, and those structural elements like the ritornello, a recurring musical idea that ties the piece together, and the da capo aria form, where the first part comes back after a contrasting middle section. These things really impacted how Bach wrote for both voices and instruments. It allowed him to build these bigger, more expansive musical forms.
Okay, so after Weimar, Bach moves to Cöthen in 1717. It seems like this period marks a shift in his focus, the kind of music he was writing.
Yeah, that's spot on. In Cothen, he's appointed Kapellmeister, basically the chapel master or director of music at the court of Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Cöthen.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. Prince Leopold, he was a musician himself,
Really?
and he had immense respect for Bach. He gave him a great salary and tons of artistic freedom.
That's amazing. So during this time, the focus shifts to instrumental music, right?
Well,
Less vocal work.
exactly. The focus moved to secular instrumental music because Prince Leopold was a Calvinist. Their church services were much simpler, musically speaking. So during his time in Cöthen, Bach composed some of his most famous instrumental pieces: the Brandenburg concertos, the suites for solo cello, and the sonatas and partitas for solo violin.
It's like he could do it all. He could move so smoothly from sacred vocal music to these purely instrumental forms.
Oh, absolutely. He could adapt his creativity, to the specific needs and preferences of whoever his patron was.
Yeah, a musical chameleon.
Exactly. And his years in Cothen, they solidified his reputation as a true master of instrumental composition.
All right, then comes 1723. It's the final chapter of his career, and many would say the most important one. He arrives in Leipzig.
Right, he accepts this huge, prestigious, but very demanding position of Thomas Cantor, the cantor of St. Thomas's School.
Yeah.
This role in Leipzig was a lot. He was teaching music and Latin at the school and had to provide music for the main churches in the city, too.
Talk about wearing many hats. And this is where we see that unbelievable output of church cantatas, right? The sheer amount he composed in Leipzig is just mind-blowing.
I know, right? He often had to write a brand new cantata every week for the Sunday service and all major church holidays. It's crazy. But beyond the cantatas, this period also saw him create these monumental sacred works that we still play and love today. Things like the St. John and St. Matthew Passions and the Mass in B minor.
It's not just the quantity, it's the quality. It
Uh-huh.
shows his work ethic, his dedication to being a church musician.
Oh.
But amidst all this work, Bach also had a big family life, right?
Oh, yeah. Huge family. In 1707, he married his cousin Maria Barberbach, and they had 7 kids together. Sadly, she died in 1720. A year later, he married Anna Magdalena Wilken, a professional singer, and they had 13 more children. That's 20 kids. And despite how common it was for infants to die back then, 10 of his children survived to adulthood. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And get this, several of his sons became well-known composers themselves. I mean, that Bach household must have been buzzing with music. You can say that again. The fact that guys like Carl Philipp Emanuel and Johann Christian became successful musicians, it tells you a lot about the environment Johann Sebastian created at home. Nurturing, inspiring, it had to be.
Sadly, his later years were marked by the health issues.
Yeah, as he got older, his eyesight started to fail. In 1750, he even had surgery, performed by this English surgeon, John Taylor, but it didn't work. He ended up completely blind.
It's incredibly moving to think that even when he couldn't see, he kept composing, dictating his ideas to his students. It shows how strong that inner musical world was for him.
It really does. That dedication to his art, it never left him. Bach passed away in Leipzig on July 28, 1750, most likely from complications of a stroke. At first, he was buried in an unmarked grave at St. Thomas's Church.
And there's that weird connection to Handel, isn't there? I mean, the same surgeon who operated on Bach, he also did an unsuccessful eye surgery on George Friedrich Handel, who also died not long after.
It's a strange and kind of sad coincidence linking these two giants of the Baroque, in this odd way.
Okay, let's dig into what made Bach's music so unique. His incredible mastery of musical forms. This wasn't just about being prolific. He was pushing the boundaries within these forms.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, to be that good across so many different musical forms, it's almost unheard of. Let's start with his understanding of counterpoint. This is like the art of combining multiple independent melodies, and he was a genius at it. especially in his fugues.
And the Well-Tempered Clavier is a perfect example of this. It's two sets, each with 24 preludes and fugues, one for every major and minor key. It's an absolutely monumental achievement, both intellectually and artistically. What made it so groundbreaking?
Well, the well-tempered clavier wasn't just some theoretical exercise. Bach showed that you could write beautiful music in all 24 keys, using a new system of tuning that allowed for a more consistent sound across the board. It revolutionized how composers and musicians thought about harmony and keys. It opened up all these new possibilities for expression.
Like he expanded the musical language.
Exactly. Then there's the art of fugue, which came out after his death. It's this incredible systematic exploration of the fugue, a series of increasingly complex fugues and canons, all based on one theme. It's like the ultimate statement on what you can do with counterpoint. And it's so poignant that it was left unfinished.
You can really see his mind working. He wasn't just writing pretty tunes, he was exploring the fundamental principles of harmony and how melodies work together.
Absolutely. And he made just as big of a contribution to the concerto, both the solo concerto, which features one main instrument, and the concerto grosso, which features a small group of solo instruments having a musical conversation with a bigger orchestra.
And when you say concerto, everyone thinks Brandenburg concertos, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those six concertos that he dedicated in 1721, they're just iconic. What makes them so special is the way he uses instruments. Each concerto has a unique combination of solo instruments. Like the second one has a trumpet, recorder, oboe, and violin all playing together, and they're having this awesome musical conversation with the rest of the orchestra. It shows Bach's imagination, his understanding of how to blend different instruments. It's just incredible.
Right, like creating this tapestry of sound.
Exactly. And he also wrote tons of concertos for solo instruments like the violin and harpsichord. And in those, you see his ability to balance virtuosity, that dazzling skill with these rich, full orchestral textures.
Okay, then there's the sacred cantatas. He wrote so many of them, especially during his time in Leipzig. What was the typical structure of these pieces? Like, what was he trying to achieve?
Remember, his job basically required him to compose a new cantata every week. These pieces typically weave together sections from the Bible, poems that were written to reflect on those scriptures, and traditional Lutheran chorales, those hymns that everyone in the congregation knew and sang.
Some of these cantatas, they have some of the most famous and moving pieces of music ever written. Like, Waschet auf, ruft uns die Stimme, Sleepers Wake, and Herz und Mund und Taten leben, which includes the incredibly beloved Jesu, joy of man's desiring. How did he manage to blend all these elements so effectively?
Bach's genius was that he combined his deep faith with his incredible musical creativity. It wasn't just about setting words to music. He used the music to really bring out the meaning of the text, to create a truly spiritual experience. He'd often take these familiar chorales and give them these amazing new settings, which both comforted and inspired people.
And we can't forget the sonatas and partitas for solo violin. Many consider these to be some of the most important and challenging works ever written for the violin. What's so special about them?
I know, right? These six pieces, three sonatas and three partitas, they explore everything you can do on the violin, technically and emotionally. What's amazing is that Bach creates the illusion of multiple voices, melody, harmony, counterpoint, all with just one instrument. And the partita number 2 in D minor, it ends with this incredible chaconne. It's 15 minutes long, and it's considered one of the greatest achievements in all of violin music.
Yeah, the chaconne. It's like its own world.
Totally. And he didn't just write for the violin, he composed sonatas for other instruments like the viola da gamba. It shows you how versatile he was when writing for solo instruments.
There's no question Bach's influence on Western music is immense. It stretches across centuries, and we're still studying, performing, and appreciating his works for their complexity, beauty, and sheer depth. What do you think it is about his music that makes it so timeless, so impactful?
Well, it's his innovation, especially in counterpoint and harmony. He set up principles that would influence composers for generations. I mean, he wasn't just a master of the musical language of his time, he expanded it. He created new possibilities that others would build on. And his dedication, his artistry, it's been an inspiration for countless musicians.
So if someone is just starting to explore Bach's music, what would you recommend? Where should they begin?
I think listening to the Well-Tempered Clavier is a great place to start. You really get a sense of his keyboard mastery and how he explored harmony. The Brandenburg concertos are awesome for getting into his vibrant instrumental writing and how he used different instrument combinations. And if you want to dive into his sacred vocal music, the St. Matthew Passion is powerful and moving, although it is quite long. Maybe start with some of his shorter cantatas. And for pure violin genius, you have to listen to the sonatas and partitas for solo violin.
Great advice. And it's worth hearing different interpretations of his music too, right? I mean, different performers bring different perspectives.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Different musicians will bring their own ideas to his music, revealing all sorts of new nuances and way of expressing it. And if you want to go even deeper, there are tons of great biographies and analyses of his work out there.
Johann Sebastian Bach's legacy, it's massive. It continues to inspire and move people centuries later.
It really does. I mean, he was unique. He took all the musical traditions of his time and blended them into something new, something timeless. Think about how he could weave these complex musical ideas with such deep emotion. That's what still resonates with us today, with both creators and listeners.
Absolutely. Well, this has been Resonance Podcast. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you.